Okay, our next speaker, Ricardo Martins, has spoken at TypeCon before. He comes all the way up from Brazil to do that. He's an expert in graphic communication. He's an educator. He teaches typography, communications design, and many other things related to graphic communication. And he's kind of come across a theory of sorts in that we're moving forward with digital type and web fonts and all this kind of stuff, and yet in many ways we still have this holdover in how we talk about the measurements of type, and we talk about the measurements of type in a technology or a system that goes back to the mid-1800s or prior to that if you're in Europe. He's going to present to you today a new way of perhaps looking at the measurement of type. So please welcome Ricardo.
Why won't you focus, camera?
So good morning for everyone. I'd like to apologize for my accent. My language is not, my first language is not English, it's Portuguese. I came from Brazil. I'd like to thank for everyone who gave me tips how to pronounce the words. I'm just learning how to read in English, and if I make some mistakes, I beg your pardon. Okay, when designers are using type, they need to make several choices. What is the proper typeface for this project? What is the correct size of the letters? What is the right space between letters, words, and lines of text, and so on. And every time a designer deals with type and fonts, he must have to answer the question, which size should I use for this text? The answer to that question depends on many factors, such as the purpose of the message, the color of the text, background color, the size of the counter, the age and vision condition of the people who will read the text, the thickness of the lines and strokes that make up the letter, the existence of any law or regulation, for example, regulations on contract letters, advertising, packaging, and on medicine leaflets, and so on. However, when measuring type is very important for designers in their daily routine and is done quite often, the way you do that today is still the same as the last century. That means the measurement is made through body size. But that is a problem. A metal body no longer exists since the days of phototypesetting, created in 1946 and introduced to America in 1948. When phototypesetting arrived, it was no longer necessary to use lead type, and therefore the logic of measuring metal blocks using a point system to determine the font size has completely lost its meaning. In the old days, the printing industry used lead type. The different pieces of type for a given size, regardless of typeface or manufacturer, needed to properly align. This was crucial to the success of the word process and indeed provided the impetus for the development of the point system. For most of the time, it could be said that point system met the requirements of the printing industry for a measurement system which was sufficiently accurate and sufficiently easy to use. But after the invention of phototypesetting, some typographic experts realized that point system and body size measurement had some troubles. There were no more lead type blocks to measure the size of the body. The point has had different definitions in different places at different times, and even among different manufacturers, thanks to Fourier, Didot, and Marder using company. And the third trouble was the point system has no relation to the metric system. So, for a period of about 20 years, from mid-60s to the mid-80s, type experts devoted much effort to adapt type measurement to non-metal-based typesetting technologies and to the adoption of the metric system. The leader of this process was the Austrian immigrant Ernst Hoch. He said, "The physical body occurs only in metal composition, and photo composition is characterized by an image untied to any kind of body." Therefore, he suggested to change the way we measure type to suit the times. Speaking of time, let's see a brief history of attempts to change the standards of typographic measure. In the past, type was measured by the physical size of a lead block. Back then, even dealing with something tangible, there were no consensus on how they should measure it. There were at least 3 different standards of type measurement. As you can see over there, Pierre-Simon Fourier, François Ambroise Didot, and Mardelus and Company. They were the 3 different patterns or standards that we have the best. In 1972 came a first proposal to modify the way they measure type. The British standard recommended a straightforward description of size in millimetric terms rather than the use of a metric point. Ben Susan from 1972 points out that the standard recommended that type be measured from baseline to baseline, as you can see here. They call it character depth or character image. In 1977, European Commission set 1st January 1978 as the date by which all measurements conflicting with the metric system should be abolished. The date was later changed to 1st April 1978. In 1978, an ISO working group produced, ISO is ISO, International Standards Organization, produced a proposal that recommended that the character image should be measured, and that, for the purpose of short reference, capital letter height, H height, should be used as the normal size designator. About this, Siemens Obergen in 1983 states that the ISO draft proposals recognized the logic of phototypesetting in rejecting the notion of measuring the type body, but chose instead the height of the capital letters as definitive measurement. It is remarkable that the ISO draft proposals, having made the necessary break with tradition, failed to carry through the logic of this change and recognize that dimension which decides the visual size of the type, the lowercase height. In 1985, Apple incorporated Adobe PostScript page description language. Given that Adobe introduced this powerful page description standard, and that Apple introduced a radically new input technology, the decision to incorporate a default value for the point of 1 by 72 inch must be seen as the 20th century most unfortunate missed opportunity in the area of typographic measurement. Even today, we still can't measure type correctly and to know what 10 point means, and this is still a lucky hit. I will explain it better. Okay. So what's the problem here? When you are using a graphic software or something like that, probably we have a measure of the body size, like a reference to know what is the size of the letters. But the problem is, a designer never knows where does it start the measure. It's here, it's here, it's here, it's here. They don't know it. They don't know where it finishes. Because this measure doesn't measure what does really matter for us. That is the size of the strokes. Because sometimes we have different texts with the same body size, but visually they are different. You have thicker lines, or you have broader lines, wider lines, or things like that. And they visually are different, so this doesn't help us. This is a kind of measure that would be useful in the past, in the last century, not today. For example, when designers need to choose the correct type size for a signage, most of them print a page with type and guess if people will see at a specific distance. Even legislators that create regulation rules to specify which is the right size for a fine print on contracts or medicine leaflets have no parameter to say which size should be used. Sometimes they claim the right size is X millimeters high, but that isn't enough to guarantee someone will effectively see the text. But what is the enough size to see a letter? In optometry, people with a normal vision should be able to discriminate a line separated by a visual angle of 1 minute of arc. So you can see this line, you can see this kind of inscription here. This is the parameter that optometrists use to see if you can read without the use of glasses. If you can read this line, the size of the strokes are calculated for a vision of 6 meters from the distance. You should be able to see the strokes of these letters. If a people can't see the first letter over there, it is considered legally blind. So they use this kind of chart to determine if you need to use glasses or not. It's a physiological reference. So, in other words, that means a person should be able to see comfortably a dot of 73 micron at 25 centimeters of distance, or 0.29 millimeters at 1 meter of distance. This is called by optometry the VOTL, Vision Optical Threshold Limit. It's calculated in this way. If you multiply 250 times sin times 1 divided by 60, it should be equal to 0.07. This is the minimum size of the stroke to be read at 25 centimeters of distance. If you multiply 1000 times sin 1 divided by 60, should be equal to 0.29. This is the smaller width of line you should have to be seen at 1 meter of distance. So when designers are designing text to be read, they must know that what is the reading distance in order to decide the correct size of the letters. A copy to be read from a short distance will not have the same size as the text to be read 10, 20, 50 meters away. And that's why the measure of type size based on body dimensions, metal body dimensions, is almost useless. It would be helpful if you could, instead of using a ghost body, have the X height dimension as well as the average stroke width in terms of viewing potential. That is, the graphic software should be able to inform how far people with normal vision could read the text with maximum contrast. We could create a new metric unit called normal visualization unit or something like that. One NVU, it's like abbreviation for normal visualization unit, would be equal to 0.58 millimeters. That is 2 times the optical threshold limit for normal vision under normal conditions, maximum contrast, enough lighting, reading without displacement of the reader. For example, if a text has a size of 1 NVU, it would mean that it could be read comfortably at 1 meter of distance. If you would change the size to 10 NVU, the distance for normal reading would be 10 meters. Of course, other factors could impact this measurement, like the shade of black you use to render the text over a white paper. If you have a text which is 50 gray over a white background, you probably should double its size from 1 NVU to 2 NVU if you want it to be read. With this new measurement unit, would it be possible to discover new relationships between text size and shade, size and noise backgrounds, size and stressful conditions, size and driver's speed, size and lighting conditions, size and mobile screens, and so on. Of course, this is not the final word about what should be the ideal measurement system, but is a proposal to measure what really matters to designers when they need to set text at an appropriate size. What we see. Reform is necessary if typographic measurement is to be seen to make sense. The actual system that measures a ghost body linked to the old metal type logic doesn't help us to make fast, appropriate, and safe choices related to type size. In the last 30 years, we had some attempts to change this since the beginning of phototypesetting or photo composition. In the 60s and 70s, besides changing the way type was measured, it was necessary to restock type and make equipment adaptation. Today is just simply an issue of adapting software. We already took the first steps. Now, typographers, researchers, and software industry should get together to design intelligent system of typographic measurement to help designers to make informed decisions about the size of the texts. This is my current research project, and it will be probably the subject of my PhD thesis at the Illinois Institute of Technology the next year. I would like to invite you to be part of this project. Those who are interested in the subject of typographic measure, please look for me after this lecture or during this event, and I will be happy to explain more details about this study, which aims to change once and for all how we measure typography. We can have 2 questions. Please, I would like to ask you to speak a little bit slowly because my English is not so good.
I'm very much in favor of any system of measurement that people find useful for their work. I think the idea of a system of measurement that takes into account stroke weight is a very good idea. All of the proposals I've seen, such as the ISO ones from the last 30, 40 years for reforming how we deal with type, they've all been very Latin-centric. they've only taken into account the characteristics of the Latin alphabet, and that has seemed to me both stupid and dangerous. As someone who makes type for a lot of different writing systems, I have to say that actually having an invisible virtual body against which any writing system can be applied is actually an incredibly useful system. It may not be useful to the graphic designer on the other end for some of the things that graphic designer needs to do, but for the manufacturer of type, it's very, very important.
Thank you. Someone wants like to add some observation over there?
Yeah. In my talk, I mentioned the work of Matthew Lukish on looking at different aspects of type, and I think it may be a trap to try to look for one measure, because, Lukish, for example, with measuring visibility, found that it varies both with height and with boldness, and you have variables like width and size of counters, size of stems, of horizontal and vertical and diagonal. The eye reacts to all of these things differently. So I think looking for one single measure may be a trap, but certainly like something like X height is more meaningful. But I think looking to final use and what is going to be most useful for different purposes is maybe a better guide, and not think of solving this once and for all as maybe misleading.
Yeah, I agree with you, and we have a lot of different factors to take in account. That's why this is just the start of this project. In the next years, 40 years probably, I will spend a lot of time trying to list all those factors and to see some kind of, not just one measure. We could have a set of them. You could have the X height together with a measure of the stroke of letter, for example. So design could make informed decisions about the correct type size.
Is our last speaker before lunch. Kenneth is an art director, he's a graphic designer, a photographer, and an educator. A little bit ago,